We got some massive news coming out here. The Las Vegas Raiders have officially made it official, and they're bringing back superstar pass rusher Malcolm Koonce on a one-year contract worth up to $12 million. I could not be more excited about this move right here. You guys know that I've been saying this for years. If you guys have followed this channel, you guys can look it up. You can go look at all my Malcolm Koonce specific videos. This is a guy that I've been very, very high on since the beginning, and we finally actually got him to break out in 2023. And going into 2024, the guy was about to take off. Unfortunately, he had an ACL injury, and we never saw what the Raiders defense could have looked like with, a healthy Koonce, a healthy Crosby, a healthy Butler, a healthy Wilkins. We never got to see that defensive line, but now we might actually see it because the Raiders are bringing back Malcolm Koonce. And I'm excited for this guy to be able to come back because, the worst thing the Raiders could have done going into this actual draft was, hey, we don't have a defensive end outside of, opposite of Maxx that we 100% trust. I know Tyree Wilson's on this football team, but let's be honest, Tyree Wilson hasn't shown us anything at this point, right? The guy right now is more so of a bust than he is of a, 7th overall pick caliber player. The fact that we had Jalen Carter and Darnell Wright go right after Tyree Wilson is very, very sad. And I don't think people recognize that yet, but I think we will in the next 2 to 3 years. Those guys are going to be great players at their positions, and Tyree, we'll see what he pans out into. But going into the actual draft, the Raiders bringing back Malcolm Koonce, you give yourselves a little bit of breathing room where you don't feel like, hey, we don't have that pass rusher opposite of Maxx, so let's potentially reach for a defensive end. Even though the Raiders, might not necessarily feel like that, if they were actually going to the draft, I wouldn't want to go into the draft and feel like, hey, Abdul Carter's off the board. Maybe our number 1 and number 2 wide receiver off the board. Let's just go ahead and take D end number 2, right? Let's take James Pierce or let's take Shamar Stewart, right? Guys that, they might not be ready day one. To me, by bringing back Malcolm Koonce, this is the best case scenario for the Las Vegas Raiders. Of course, it's only a one-year contract. It's only $12 million for Koonce. He's basically betting on himself that he'll be good to go this season. Then, of course, he'll look for that big contract the year after. And I think for the Raiders, this makes so much sense. And I think for Malcolm Koonce, this makes a lot of sense as well. We're going to actually get to see a defensive line that I think could be the best defensive line in the NFL. And I don't say that just to say it. I don't say that because I'm a Raider fan. I'm a diehard Raider fan. I say that because I watch a lot of tape of so many different teams. I watched the Eagles enough this year to know that they have a really good defensive line, but the Raiders' defensive line is better, right? The Raiders' defensive line, if it's healthy, is literally more talented than the Eagles' defensive line. Now, obviously, the Eagles have Vic Fangio, who's arguably the best defensive coach in the NFL, and you can't really make up for that, right? Truth be told, Vic Fangio can take, the worst defense in the NFL, statistically, and a year later, they'll be, arguably a top 10 defense, right? That's what Vic Fangio can kind of do to a defense. But on paper, the Raiders' defensive line is elite, right? As we're going to go into this year, if our guys are healthy, teams better watch out. And again, we saw glimpses of this if you think back to 2023, right? Those final 9 games, teams are struggling to block just Malcolm Koonce and Maxx Crosby when these guys got hot, right? When these guys started playing 40, 50, 60 snaps together, teams are struggling to block just those 2 guys. And of course, Adam Butler had stepped up as well in those, final 9 weeks, and he started to flash before having the year he just had this past season. But I think what the Raiders showed in 2023 and the fact you added a top 10 D tackle in Christian Wilkins, I think this defensive line is going to be very, very nasty this year. And I'm excited and I'm glad that John Spytek is building the right way. We lost Trayvon Merrick, who ended up getting $17 million a year. We lost Robert Spillane. I haven't seen the contract details, but let's just say Spillane got even, $12 million. That's what his contract was. To pay a linebacker $12 million, to pay a safety $17 million, that's not good value. Safeties and linebackers don't impact the game the same way a defensive lineman does. A safety is a good player, but at $7 or $8 million makes a lot more sense. It doesn't make sense to pay a guy $17, $18 million. Right? Safeties just don't have that type of impact. It doesn't make sense to pay a guard $19 million the way the Packers paid Aaron Banks. Aaron Banks is a good guard. But at, 8 to 10 million, he's great value. But at 19 million, it's just not worth it, right? And Malcolm Koonce at $12 million is a huge value for the Raiders. Now, it does suck. It's only a one-year contract. But that doesn't mean that if Malcolm Koonce doesn't have a good 3, 4, 5 weeks, that the Raiders couldn't extend him long-term, right? They couldn't give him 18, 19, 20 million. Remember, Josh Sweat only got, I think, like 17 million a year. So I don't see why Malcolm Koonce wouldn't get roughly around that. Although I have said this in the past and I'll say it again, Malcolm Koonce is better in my opinion than Josh Sweat. At least he was in those 9 games. He's a much better pass rusher, and I think teams generally favor pass rushers. You guys know I'm a huge Malcolm Koonce fan, so I'm very happy to see that he's back. But the Raiders did make one other move, and this move actually could indicate that the Raiders are making some sort of switch on the defense side of the football. The Raiders obviously lost Trayvon Merrick, so to change that out, they went out and signed free agent safety Jeremy Chinn. The contracts were a 2-year contract worth $16 million. Our Jordan Schultz says it's worth over 16. It'll be right about $16 million. So the Raiders are obviously paying Jeremy Chinn $8 million. That's great value right there to have. And I love the fact that that's what we're paying Jeremy Chinn, because Jeremy Chinn is a good, productive football player. Now, he's no means a top 10 safety. He's no means going to be a guy that's going to have 10 interceptions. It's going to change every game for the Raiders. But he'll be out there on the football field, and he'll line up all over the field. This guy's a legit Swiss Army knife. In fact, I was looking at some of the snap data from this guy, and it's pretty incredible what this guy has done. Last year, he played 470 snaps inside the box. And of that, only 14 were actually as a safety, right? So think about a split safety. The free safety takes 2 steps back. The strong safety takes 2 steps forward, right? It's still split safety. One guy's just a little bit closer, one guy's further. The guy that's closer, the strong safety, is considered inside the box. He only took 14 of those snaps, right? But he has 470 inside the box. So what that means is this guy's playing linebacker for the Commanders last year, right? Jeremy Chinn, the safety, is playing linebacker for the Washington Commanders last year. He lined up 106 times as a defensive lineman, specifically as an outside linebacker, right? On both the right and left side. 106 snaps. So what that means is you take that offensive tackle, 3 yards outside of that offensive tackle, that's where this guy lined up 106 times last year. So again, Jeremy Chinn is lining up all over the football field. He's coming down into the blocks playing linebacker. He's coming onto the defensive line. This guy's a legit Swiss Army knife for the Washington Commanders, or at least he was this past season. He played, 369 snaps as a free safety. This is a legit post safety. He's a guy playing in the middle third of the field, right? He's 20 yards off the ball. So again, on the line of scrimmage, 20 yards off the ball, split safety, lines up in the box as a strong safety, linebacker. He plays slot corner, right? 222 snaps as a slot corner. So again, Jeremy Chinn's doing it all. And when you think about it, it makes sense that the Raiders are bringing in Jeremy Chinn, and this is kind of what they want from Jeremy Chinn, right? It makes sense that this is exactly what the Raiders want from a guy who is, he's coming in for the Raiders scheme, which I think could actually be different than what it was last year. Think about this. The Raiders lost, we lost Robert Spillane. We've lost Nate Hobbs, who has officially went and signed with the Packers. And we lost Trayvon Merrick, right? You lost a guy who was the leader on the third level of the defense. You lost our leader in the second level of the defense, right? It's the leader that's calling all the plays as well in Robert Spillane. Those are guys that Patrick Graham had handpicked, almost, right? Trayvon Merrick wasn't handpicked, but those are guys that Patrick Graham really, really, really liked and kind of molded into the guys that he wanted for his defense. And we've seen it have success. And we just got rid of both of those guys. Nate Hobbs, although Patrick Graham didn't hand select him, Patrick Graham loved Nate Hobbs' versatility, right? The guy played inside and outside. And it's kind of interesting because we're getting rid of those guys that fit Patrick Graham's scheme, and we're bringing in Jeremy Chinn, who's a Swiss Army knife. Defensive lineman, linebacker, post safety, slot corner. I hope you guys realize something. Pete Carroll's defense, very, very, very similar to Dan Quinn's defense. Right? Dan Quinn, who's the current head coach of the Washington Commanders. Obviously, him and Pete Carroll coached together in the past. Very similar scheme and system. Are the Raiders actually making a switch in their schemes? I think it's an interesting thing to really factor in as we kind of go forward. Is this still Patrick Graham's defense, or is this now not Patrick Graham's defense? Instead, it's now the Pete Carroll defense. I think it's an interesting ask question. And we'll find out as they bring in more, more players and they continue to add. We'll find out. We'll find out which other linebackers they add, or which other safeties they add, or corners. We're going to find out a lot about what the Raiders' plans are just based off of some of the guys they're going to bring in and sign. you know, I think about a guy like Malcolm Koonce. Malcolm Koonce is an elite pass rusher, but he also can play a whole lot of different roles, right? Malcolm Koonce can be a true defensive end. He can also line up 3-4 yards outside as an outside linebacker, right? Which he did at Buffalo a lot, and he can drop back into coverage. To me, I think one of the things that the Raiders have kind of been doing is they've been adding guys that are versatile and play multiple different roles. Koonce is one of those guys. Isaiah Pola-Mao is one of those guys. Jeremy Chinn is one of those guys. And it'll be interesting to see which guys they continue to add at this point. Now, I've watched Jeremy Chinn's tape over the past hour since the signing actually happened. And I'm not going to lie to you guys, man. I think Trayvon Merrick is a better safety for sure. But I think Jeremy Chinn does hit harder. He sets the tone for sure. And I do think he's a lot more versatile than a guy like Trayvon Merrick, right? He's better around the line of scrimmage for sure. He's a better run defender. And I think he'll also be better being able to cover tight ends that might be a little bit bigger. I do think Trayvon Merrick's a better safety, right? Generally speaking, I think the market also speaks for itself. One guy got $17 million, the other got $8 million. But I do think Jeremy Chinn's still a good football player that can play well depending on the scheme and system. And again, you know, safety oftentimes is also is very system dependent, right? Same as linebackers, same as your safeties and your corners. And I spoke about this in my video earlier that those positions are system positions, right? Some guys will go from being, you know, superstar corners under Dan Quinn to falling off the following year, right? Depending on who the defensive coordinator is, right? There's a reason why Deron Bland could be a 5th, 6th round pick and break the record for interceptions and return interceptions to the house under Dan Quinn. It's a system position in my opinion, and I think when you bring in a guy like Jeremy Chinn, you're saying that this is our new system that we're going to kind of go with as we go forward. I think it's an interesting thing that we're going to have to consider. And then also, are we sure Jeremy Chinn isn't going to be a linebacker for the Raiders? Are we 100% sure he's more so going to be a safety, quote unquote? I think that's another interesting thing we're going to have to kind of consider. And again, we'll find out as we kind of go forward. And I'll also say this, you know, Devin Harper is a guy that some of our beat reporters have talked about a lot. And then, of course, Trey Taylor's another guy not to sleep on as well. Isaiah Pola-Mao. Those are 3 young safeties. We don't really know what these guys can ultimately develop into. We have safeties on the roster. It will be interesting to see if the Raiders are 100% comfortable with this group. You're obviously bringing Jeremy Chinn as well. Or will they say, hey, let's go out and let's draft another safety? There's a ton of good safeties in this class. Malachi Starks is the absolute game changer. I think he'd be a great football player to have. Starks is kind of similar to Jeremy Chinn, I would say, in terms of like the body structure and the way they're kind of built. They set the tone. They're great tacklers. It's an interesting thought that the Raiders could actually be shifting away in terms of the scheme and system. But we're going to find out a lot, man, and I'm excited. I think what the Raiders are doing right now is the best thing forward for this team. Don't overspend, right? Bring back the pieces like Chinn for $8 million, Koonce for $12 million. That makes sense, right? Let's not pay a guard $20 million. That just doesn't make sense. Let me know what you guys think, man. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.